Hello, everybody. Today we will be doing what I call cookie catchers. This is a super basic, like beginner sort of introduction. This is what I do to get some of my kids into Pygame because they already have a basic understanding of Python. So what I'm expecting here is an understanding of functions, for loops, if statements, basic stuff. You should be um, probably a month or two into your Python um, career or whatever here. Okay, so we're going to start by making a file called main.py. Within this file, I'll go ahead and zoom in here. Within this file, we're going to start by importing Pygame. Obviously, we can't do anything without importing Pygame. Next, we need to call pygame.init. I usually keep this one line away from the import pygame just to give me a bit of space because it kind of doesn't do much for my code. It does prepare Pygame, and if we ever hear, there we go. It initializes all the imported Pygame modules, so you can see that it's basically just getting things ready. And we'll talk about what initializing is in Python in a little bit when we get to our actual cookie. We're then going to set a caption, so we can say pygame.display.setCaption here, and we have to give it a string. Let's set the caption to maybe cookie catchers. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a variable to hold onto our screen, and it's equal to pygame.display.setMode. Now inside of here we have to give it a size. However, the size is a two-dimensional tuple. So what we're going to do here, or sorry, it's just a tuple. So we have our set mode in parentheses here because it is a method, and then it takes a size here. Now a lot of things you're probably used to will take an x, comma, a y. Instead it takes a list with x and y inside of it. So we'll go ahead and do maybe 250 pixels by 250. Let's actually do 500 by 500. Next we're going to make a while loop. While true, this one runs forever. And all we're going to say in here is pygame.display.flip. We're going to go ahead and flip our display. Okay, so we hit run, and here's our little cookie catchers. You'll notice it's going to crash, but there it is. But here it is. So you can see how our set caption defines what shows up on the top here, where it says cookie catchers, and our set mode defines the dimensions. Now the reason that screen, oh, there we go. Okay, that'll go away eventually. Okay, so the reason that screen here is set to the set mode instead of the set caption is because we're setting it to the basically the surface. Pygame works with what are called surfaces. Surfaces are basically squares created from images. So when you import a image or load an image into Pygame, it becomes a surface. From that surface, you can do multiple things. So instead of using the set caption, this does not need to be here, but if it's not there, you'll notice you get a very different thing. I think it doesn't even say anything. I think it's just a little snake image on the top left. Okay, let's go ahead and make it not crash now. We need to set up an event loop. So for event in, and then pygame.event.get. So they have by default have a event loop for us. This will retrieve any sort of event from the user. That could be a button press, it could be your mouse moving, a click, pretty much anything that has to do with a user touching their hardware. Okay, so we want to check if the event.type is equal to pygame.quit in all caps here. If it is, we're going to call pygame.quit. Okay, so now when we run here, you'll notice it shouldn't crash instantly if it lets me run it. Do I have an error? I might have an error. Let's see, let's check our, no, shouldn't have an error. Oh, invalid syntax, there we do. What did I do wrong? What in the world? What? Syntax error, invalid syntax. Interesting. It says it's on line 1, where I imported Pygame. Okay, it's a little weird. What in the world? Okay. Let's try it again. There we go. Okay, weird. I just went ahead and restarted it, and now it works fine. Now you notice we're not getting any errors here. So this is completely, I can throw it around as much as I want. And then your pygame.quit event, that's hitting this X at the top here. You'll notice it does Oh, it ran twice because I hit run twice. We get an error down here when we hit that, and that's because it's still trying to flip after that. So we'll add something in there later to fix that. Let's go ahead and get our cookie in now. We're going to create a folder called images, and now we need a cookie. I don't have one right now, so we're going to go and get one. Okay, so here we're going to go ahead and open Pascal. Pascal is a sprite editor, and we're going to really quickly make a cookie. So I'm going to go in here and grab the circle tool, and there's my cookie. And maybe we'll fill it with a sort of brownish color. There we are. And where's my fill tool? Here it is. Boom, like a cookie. And then we get a little more dark brown color here for the chocolate chips of my cookie. We can kind of see up in the top left here what it's going to look like in game, because it won't be this big. And there's my cookie. Now it's important that you fill as much of this square as you can. Pygame is going to call this the trigger or the collider, right? So basically, if my mouse clicked out in this section, it would still count. So if I made a thing that's 500 by 500, but my cookie only takes up a square that's maybe 50 by 50, I now have 450 pixels to the left, or to the side basically, and 450 pixels vertically of what I would call dead space that still triggers. So you do want to be careful about how much space you're taking up. You want to take up as much of the image as you can when you draw. If you want something to be small, lower the resolution of the image. Okay, we're going to go ahead and hit the export button here and download it as a PNG. So it'll see the sprite sheet file export. You'll notice this one's 32 by 32. I can almost guarantee you that's not going to be big enough, and we'll mess with it then. But here's our image. Let's go ahead and rename it to cookie.png. Now we're going to make a new file here and call it cookie.py. Notice I made it lowercase. We're going to start by importing Pygame. There we are. And this time we're not going to initialize Pygame because this script is going to be tacking itself onto the old one. So basically main is going to be telling it what to do. So we don't need to worry about initializing Pygame here. We're going to create a class called cookie with a capital C. Now, for anybody that has never used a class before, a class is basically a container of functions that are able to talk to each other using what's called self, and you'll see how that works in a minute. We're going to create the init function. This is a dunder function, which means that you put double underscores, dunder, right? Dunder. You can see how it's basically double underscores, right? And what we care about here with our init function is we want to pull in screen. So self, by default, is a parameter that has to be in. You have to put it in no matter what. It is not, though, something that you pass through. So you'll see that later. We do want to get screen from main because we have no way of accessing screen from here. Okay. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and define a few variables. Once I line myself up, there we go. So we're going to start by setting up the image variable. Notice I created a variable called image, and it's stored inside of self, and you'll see why that's important in a moment. So self.image is equal to pygame.image.load. So this is where we're loading an image to turn it into a surface. Our images folder, we're going to open that up and grab cookie.png. Okay, next let's go ahead and set up the rectangle around it. This is going to be by doing self.image.getRect. Basically creating a rectangle around our image. So if our image exists as a little square, as we saw when we go here. So here's our image. And our getRect basically keeps track of the square around the image, surrounding the image, and allows us to use it as positional arguments. For example, once we've created the rect, we can now use rect to get the corners of the image, as well as the x and y values of the sides. Now, anybody that's taken a geometry class is going to remember when you're, as far as graphs go, coordinate planes, lines are generally x or y values, not both. So for example, something like y equals 2, which is a horizontal line. And that's kind of how those work, and we'll see that too. Okay, so now we want to go ahead and create another variable for the screen, and we're just going to set that equal to screen. So this would be like a function if I was creating a variable and calling it s, and s equaled screen. Okay, from here let's go ahead, let's resize our image really quickly. Or we won't do that yet. So from here, this is pretty good. Let's go ahead and center our cookie into the middle of the screen. So we're going to say self.rect.center. We're setting the rectangle's center. So by default, Pygame is going to want to position objects based off of the top left of them. So this top left corner is considered the position of this. This is the x and the y. We're pretty used to basically somewhere around the middle, the center of the rectangle, being what we use to position things, but unfortunately we use the top left in Pygame. Now this is true everywhere. The top left of the screen when we run it is also the origin. So right here on the top left here is also the origin. What that means is this is 0, 0. This makes this, what, 500x, 0y. Now the important thing here is that going down is not negative anymore. It actually adds in the y value. So you have on the bottom right here is 500, 500. We'll get used to that as well. So we're going to set it center to the screen center. So we say self.screen. Now the problem is the screen is just a surface, not a rectangle. So let's go ahead and get its rect. And from there we can get the center. Okay, that's done positioning our cookie. Let's go ahead and create a function now to blit the cookie. Remember, we are inside of a class, so let's put self in the parameter here. So here's why we use self. From here, I have no way of getting image, but we can use our self parameter to kind of pipeline through. So self.image now, or sorry, not image, .screen, .blit, a pair of parentheses, and blit takes two options, or arguments. It's going to take the image that we blit and the position. Remember, rectangle is just another way of positioning. It's an easier way of doing things. If I wanted to get the right side here, I would have to take my current x value and add w onto it. That's not a w. Oh boy, and add w onto it. This would obviously be pretty frustrating to try and do, so Pygame handled that for us by using our rect values here. So rect.topright would be the origin of the image plus the width onto the x, and so on. And that's why the rectangle is actually just a positional argument. So all we did, remember, we've taken basically an empty rectangle with the exact width and height of our image and placed it in the center of the screen. We're now taking our image and drawing it at the location of that rectangle. Okay, let's go ahead and make this work now. We're going to hit run on main and nothing happened. And that's because despite the fact that we made another script over here and wrote a bunch of code, it's a different script. I can run it here. You'll notice it won't do anything as well. Let's import it and make it work. Now we're not just going to type import. We're actually going to type from cookie, import cookie. This stops you from having to type cookie.cookie if you wanted to create a version of the cookie. We're going to make a variable called c, and it's going to be a version of our object here. So this will be c equals cookie, parentheses, and now it tells me I need to give it the screen. Well, we've stored that in a variable called screen here, so let's go ahead and pass that through. Finally, before we flip the screen, basically before we tell it to actually display everything we've drawn to it, let's blit the cookie. So luckily, our cookie has a function called blitme. We hit run, and here's our cookie. It seems to be actually a decent size. I thought it might have been too small. It's a pretty good size, so I might keep it. We might go a little bigger, but ultimately I'm pretty happy with it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to import random into our cookie here. And we're going to create a new function and call it move. So the way our cookie is going to work is every time our cookie gets clicked on, it's going to be moved. And it's going to increase your points. So we're going to start by telling our cookie to randomly pick an x and a y. So we'll say new x is equal to random.randint, pick a random integer. 0 is our start. And then we have our ending value, and our ending value is going to be 500. Now it's, no, not quite. We don't quite want to do 500 because the width of our image is important. Remember, since positioning is at the top right, if we set it to 500, that would put it off the screen. So we want to be careful. If we take a moment to look, this image is 32 by 32, and if you guys are using the cookie that I made, it'll also be 32 by 32. So I don't want to do that math in my head. Let's just do 500 minus 32. This is the same for the new y. It's also equal to random.randint 0, 500 minus 32. Okay. Now let's just go ahead and tell it to move it. So self.rect.x is equal to new x, and self.rect.y is equal to new y. Okay, back to main now. Now it's time to find a way to know when we actually click on our thing. Well, the good news is Pygame actually has a way of checking if a mouse click has occurred. This is another event type. If event.type is equal to Pygame, and this one is .mouse button down and a colon. So if the event's type is mouse button down, now we're going to go ahead and grab its position. So let's just go ahead and store this as mx and my, and it's equal to pygame.mouse.position, or get pause, and it's equal to pygame.mouse.get pause. Okay. Now we've done this mx, my as a variable, and that's because our mouse get position, our mouse position comes through as an x and a y like this. Notice it is a tuple, or a list. Mx and my will automatically say, okay, I have two variables and I have a list with two items. Mx gets the first variable, my gets the second. And so it easily assigns things for us. Instead of having to do mx equals pygame.mouse.getPosition 0, and my equals pygame.mouse.getPosition 1. Okay, we'll continue now. Now that we have our x and y values, let's go ahead and really quickly keep track of our cookies rectangle. So we'll just say rect here is equal to c.rect. That kind of just makes it easier so we don't have to say c.rect all the time. Now let's write some if statements. So if our x position, we want to know if our x position is greater than the left side of the cookie and less than the right side of the cookie. Now in math you might have heard of, you might remember having something like this. 12 is less than x, which is less than 15. That means x is anywhere between 12 and 15. We can do this in Python as well. We're going to say if rect.left is less than x, which is less than rect.right. Now recall, for a moment, that with our cookie here, the left side is always going to be less than the right, and that's because our origin starts on the top left, making this point 0 on the screen and the far right 500x on the screen. So if our mouse is anywhere between the left and the right side of the cookie, that means that it is inside. Now this doesn't keep track of the top and bottom. I could be way above the cookie, so let's also keep track of that. This should be mx, sorry. We'll say and. Now we want to know if the top of it, so rect.top, is less than my, which is less than rect.bottom. This one is kind of weird. Remember the fact that the top is always less than the bottom of an image. This is because we start at 0, 0, and as we go down, we're increasing in y. If all these are true, let's go ahead and call cookie.move. Okay, let's go ahead and run this now. And you'll notice when we click, our cookie starts moving. It seems to be duplicating itself. I wonder why that is. It's actually because we haven't filled the screen with a color yet. So the screen is only drawing things onto it in the exact spot where the cookie is. We're not having it cover over everything. So let's go ahead and do that now. Screen.fill, and we're going to give it a color. This works the same way size did in our set mode. They want a tuple here. So you're doing a pair of parentheses for the fill and then a pair of parentheses for the actual color. We'll go ahead and fill our screen with maybe a blue color. It's RGB, so we can do 0, 0, and then our blue is maybe a lighter blue of like 200. When we run here, that's a darker blue. 255, 255? 200? I don't remember how colors work. Nope, that's not really, whatever. I like that. We'll stick with that. I kind of like that color. And now you'll notice when I click on it, it doesn't duplicate itself. Okay, so now we've got our cookie jumping around the screen, and it seems to jump in good spots. I really don't seem to be having any issues with where it's spawning. Finally, let's go ahead and keep track of the player's points here. So up here, we're going to do one other thing. Pygame.font.initialize. We need to initialize a font. As far as Pygame goes, text is very weird. And what you need to do with text is you're supposed to create a font first, then define some values for it. So now that we've initialized our font, we can really pick a font we want to use. So we're going to say my font is equal to pygame.font.sysfont. And it seems to not want to help me here. It's sysfont like this. Oh no, it's capital S, sorry. Sysfont like this. And we're going to define the font we want to use. For this, we're going to use Comic Sans Microsoft MS. Now, this will work for any machine. I don't really know why it's Microsoft specifically, but it will. We're going to use 48 as our size. Now we can tell it to actually render the text. So we're going to render this as the beginning of every loop. So we're going to say text is equal to my font dot render, and now we can give it the text to render. So this will say points, and for now it starts off at 0. We tell we're going to go ahead and set false for any alias, and now we need to give it a color. My color is going to be black, so that's 0, 0, 0. Finally, we need to blit it onto the screen. I'm going to blit it on top of the cookie, so I'll blit it down here. I want it to start at the very top left, so I'll be blitting it to 0, 0. So this will be screen.blit, our surface, which is now the text thing, and a location to do it at. We don't have a rectangle for it, but that's okay. We just wanted to send it to 0, 0. So when we run it now, we see our points showing up on the top left. That's perfect. And you can see how my cookie goes under it. That's awesome. We love that. Okay. So now we don't really want this to be a thing. Instead, we're going to make a variable and call it points, and it's equal to 0. And from here, let's go ahead and set this up as an f string. That way it makes it really, really easy for us. When we hit run, we'll see it still shows up as 0. Now every time you click on the mouse, or on the cookie here, I'm going to add 1 to points. So inside of our if statement for our mouse button down, after our c.move, we're going to go ahead and say points plus equals 1. Now we run it from here, and you'll notice my points goes up every round. It is crucially important that you re-render your text every while loop. When I pull it out of here, check out what happens. My points goes up, but it only runs the render once, so it doesn't know to update the number. So now my points have gone up all the way, and hopefully I can get to something like 10. Like I said, this is a super basic introduction to Pygame. And hopefully we've kind of gotten used to a little bit of how it works. This is a total of maybe 30 lines without all the spaces, 40 lines maybe. It's really short and just was made to form as sort of an introduction. Later on, or if you're from the future, check out my channel. We're going to be doing other things. We're going to be doing Pong, Block Breaker, Snake, all sorts of fun things. So, cool. Thanks, guys.